And welcome again to our great audience. Now we are counting more than 300 people participating of the 1,000 that subscribed and are still subscribing to this open access event. So we're really happy also to share our ideas with the rest of the world. And I'm really happy also to introduce our panel. Of course, you see Peter Bakker, who also managed to make the switch. So it's great to have some ICT intelligence in the room. We have a great panel also on the theme of today, the systemic challenges. And the previous keynotes, we had a very critical presentation of Jeffrey Sachs, where he also laid out the sort of, call it the moral principles of companies, what they should do, produce the right stuff, have global value chains, also that you manage well. And then we had Peter also less gloomy, but nevertheless as critical as everybody else, that systemic change is needed, companies are needed, and they have to also walk the talk. So this will be the theme also of this panel, where we have now 4 people involved, and I will introduce you shortly, and then I give the floor to each one of you to do a short pitch on the theme of today, and then we enter into a conversation. So Helen Mets, thank you for being here. Also, she is the Executive Vice President of DSM Materials. And maybe people don't know that, but DSM, and certainly also the former CEO of Vice President, a former alumni of the Rotterdam School of Management, has been famous for the statement, "I cannot do business in a society that fails." So the systemic failure there is a problem. And I have to explain it all the time also to others, also to my students, that actually there's no business case in poverty or in deprivation of climate. So in that sense, the CIPESMA statement is really interesting. So I hope that Helen also builds on that and then explains what you're doing. Then we have Peter Balkenende. I will introduce him also, even if he hasn't been able to connect through the platform. Of course, Peter has been the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, but he is also a long-standing chair also of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, including DSM, but also Philips and other big organizations that really want to make the change. They don't only have the intention, but try to realize that. And tomorrow we will also explain that more with some of the key statements there, that it is implementing this is not easy. It is filled with dilemmas and all sorts of other problems, but it doesn't leave aside that the intention is there. And then finally, we have Nicola Kleyn, who is the Dean of the Executive Education Program at RSM. And as our Dean already has explained, RSM is really dedicated to create a bridge, not only between the Rotterdam School of Management and other universities, but also between corporate leaders and the like. And an executive program, of course, is vital. And then last but not least, of course, Peter is there. He has made already his key statement, but I would want to give the floor to Helen to make your first key statement on as an introduction to the panel. Helen, can I give you the floor?
You can, Robin, and hi everybody. And it's my pleasure to be here representing companies and corporations. And I have to say, I listened to the introduction, and you know, at the end of the day, I think we need the critics in the world as well. And of course, we also need the optimism. So I was reflecting myself on listening to those viewpoints, and it takes us all actually to drive this system change. And I think if I can talk then on behalf of the corporations and the companies, and you actually said that our retired CEO and chairman, Vice President, actually makes the comments which appears in a lot of the narratives around how can companies call themselves successful when the world around us is failing. And I actually think that is just at the heart of what this is all about. And as companies, and let me talk, you know, from a DSM point of view, we really believe that corporations and companies have a key role in driving this system change. And I don't think we can do it alone, and we'll get into some of those conversations and some of those dialogues, because it is. But we also cannot wait for others to catch up. And again, we'll talk about front running. But I think that's really, you know, one of the fundamentals is, as a company, what is your responsibility? And Peter, I like how we're talking now about the decade of action. And we're going to talk about, do we have enough business cases? Is there ever enough business cases, I could ask? And especially with this audience, I'm sure the answer is no. But we are getting business cases. And I think for me, what is really important is that we continue to talk about these business cases and find ways to actually elevate them. And as we've said, this is the decade of action. And actually, the question that was actually asked to me was, can companies contribute to system change without waiting for others? I put it back. I say, can companies wait to contribute to system change? Because I honestly think that the cost of not contributing to system change is actually getting much more expensive than it is to contribute. And I got no easier way to say it than I think that companies that aren't actually contributing are going to be left behind. And we know what happens to those that get left behind. So I think that's, I'm looking forward to the dialogue, but that's a little bit the perspective from corporate.
Thanks, Helen, also for the short pitch here. I hope Jan-Peter Balkenende, I see his picture, he's muted, so maybe you can unmute your microphone, Jan-Peter, and also open your video so that you are the next in the line.
Yeah, Rob, I wish I could open my video, but I have some technical difficulties. In any case, I can hear you. And yeah, it's a pity because I had my SDG pin on my jacket. So
yes, so do I.
So, and I could hear you loud and clear, but that's unfortunate, but that's a technical difficulty. In any case, I'm here, and thanks for giving me the floor.
Maybe I can give you the floor, Jan-Peter, but maybe explain to the audience. Normally, when I see you on the video, you have this big bookcase behind you that shows that you are very intelligent and you read a lot, so maybe that also adds to your status as a thinker. Anyway, the floor is yours, Jan-Peter.
If I would have a camera now, indeed you could see my books, and also some books of you are in it, so you know.
That's the subliminal information, but
okay.
Leave that aside. Yes.
Okay. Rob, the driving system change, corporate leadership for the SDGs. I think this is an excellent theme for this conference, and also a necessary theme because we're not on track to reach the SDGs in 2030. And I remember very clearly the words of Ban Ki-moon. He said, we will never reach the SDGs without the private sector. And this conference contributes to Ban Ki-moon's important remark. I would like to make 3 remarks. I listened carefully to Jeffrey and Peter. And what I really liked about Jeffrey was that he said it's a movement now, not only in words, but also in deeds. We have to be very practical. He was very, very clear. He said we need a holistic approach. It's about the well-being of nations. And he was very clear in his statement. I think this is exactly what we need. And Peter, clear as always. It's always fantastic to listen to you. And you said it's about accelerating the transformation, a radical system transformation, and a decade of action. I agree fully with you. I think these were important remarks. And then my 3 messages. First thing I would like to mention is passion. As at secondary school, I had to read the book A Leefbare Aarde, A Livable Planet of the Nobel Prize winner in economics, Jan Tinbergen. The book was published in 1971, and it was about the issues that still are high on the agenda: poverty, natural resources, climate, organization of societies and economies. It's a passionate book with a realistic approach. And Tinbergen said, realism in the sense of caution and conservatism is not a real realism. So we have to change. And the SDGs are about leaving no one behind, a better world for all of us now and tomorrow, and about a livable planet. All this requires a fundamental change of mindset, a holistic, inclusive and values-based approach, and the real willingness to change. So passion. Second message, rethink, reinvent and redesign. Some years ago, I listened to a keynote speech of Feike Sijbesma, a well-known Dutch man, a clear defender of the SDGs and former CEO of DSM. And it was a speech about change management. And he said, if you want to change things, there always will be criticism, doubts, and even obstruction. And then he said, if you have that type of discussion, you can bring in the remark, we don't have to change. Shall we leave things as they are now And if you ask that question, shall we leave things as they are now, then everyone feels uncomfortable because you know this is not a serious option. So rethinking, reinventing, and redesigning is necessary if you really want to realize change. And for that reason, I think there is a clear link between the SDGs, redefining market economies and capitalism, and the necessity to have other business models. And we will never reach the SDGs with the same views on Anglo-Saxon capitalism and short-term growth-oriented business models. As leads to my third message, actions and measurement. Climate change, scarcity of natural resources, poverty, inequality are realities and no one can deny. And that means that we have enough intentions, statements, fantastic declarations. And then the question is how to avoid greenwashing and SDG washing. And this is a matter of concrete actions and concrete measures. Company values, company strategies, company KPIs. I think the mainstream have to change. The level playing field has to change. Value change have to change. And measurement tools must be improved. Metrics should be on a higher level. And we need better reporting techniques. And Peter, you've mentioned many, many times, you need other types of measurement and better techniques of reporting. And at this moment, we can see there is a gap between good intentions on the one hand and the traditional assessment of quarterly financial results on the other hand. There's a gap. There's a gap between good intentions and traditional investment schemes. And there's a gap between a high SDG profile and traditional internal ways of working regarding labor conditions, income distribution, room for social, ecological creativity. It is not enough. So it's all about actions and measurements. And then my last remark, Rob, I think there are fantastic initiatives at this conference. Let me give 3 examples. You know, I like your books. You're a fantastic author, and I've read several books, and I always recommend them. But later this year, there will be a very important book written by you and Evelien van Mil, Principles of Sustainable Business, Frameworks for Corporate Action on the SDGs. I think it's an important book, more than 600 pages, and I think we really need it. And as I said in my bookcase here, I have books like Getting All the Motors Right and Business and the SDGs, a framework for corporate involvement. So I think it's good that you write another book again. The second example I would like to mention is the introduction of the Nexus approach to the SDGs. The Nexus principle is optimize positive synergies while minimizing negative trade-offs. I think it's important that we can use such a tool. And the last one has been mentioned by Ansgar as well, Better Business Scan, and employees, students, managers can use it, and it's all about scanning what is really happening. So I'm happy with all those initiatives, and I only mentioned 3, but there are many more, so that's really good. And so Rob, one thing is very clear, we are running out of time, and that was the message of Jeffrey and of Peter. Yeah. And another thing is also clear, we can do more, and we have to do more. It's a matter of mentality, it's a matter of the new orientation, it's really a matter of conviction, and I think we should change. And therefore, I'm so happy with this conference because it can really to break through his ideas. And it's so fantastic that so many people are participating. So I really hope that this conference, exactly as what you said, is a matter of information and inspiration. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. Highly appreciated also the pitch for the books. Rarely any student reads books anymore these days. So it's a struggle we face also as a professional institute of teaching, research and education. Nevertheless, let's move to our third panelist, Nicola Kleyn, who is going to answer all the questions basically that Jan-Peter and others have posed. What are business schools doing at the moment for this?
Well, let me start off by saying, Rob, thank you for inviting me. I gate crashed the conference. I've only joined RSM in the last couple of months as Dean of all of the post-experience programs. And when I saw this conference, I was really, really excited. So I said to Rob, please, can I attend? And he said, no, you have to work for your money. You must come on a panel. So I'm delighted to be here. I think in terms of reflecting on the previous speakers, if there's one word that comes up all the time, it's change. And although there are calls for radical change, I don't know that everybody has the capacity for deep-seated radical change. So I think we have to cater for a broad church. We have to also accommodate those who are going to sort of follow a nudge theory and make incremental changes. And I see Peter shaking his head because it's not enough. But I want to speak a little bit about what are the precursors for change. And you can't change without learning. So the question is then, what is the learning that we have to do? And this is where I want to speak for a moment about business schools. And I'm not going to do RSM justice if I try and speak to it, other than to say that one of the key drivers in joining the school for me was this notion about being a force for positive change. But I see we have a number of professors on the panel today. I've been introducing them and welcome to them, as well as obviously members from other stakeholder groups. I want to talk about three roles that I think, Rob, business schools are absolutely essential for. The first one is obviously research. The problem is we've spoken about time, and if we continue to only play as business schools to publish in a 3- and 4-star journal game, we're not going to create the kind of applied research in a world that is absolutely desperate for good science. So what worries me is how much bad science there is around the kinds of changes that we have to make. And so the role of business schools in terms of being partners with practice in research, but particularly on applied research in addition to the academic standards we set ourselves is critical. The dissemination of this research is critical. I'm delighted to hear Jan-Peter talk about, your book, Rob, because we have to cater to a wide church here. The notion of a very small church reading good science is no longer acceptable. So research is one aspect. I think the second thing that's really important that business schools have to contribute to is convening capacity. And so conferences like today are critical. We can no longer sit with groups of divided stakeholders preaching only to the choir. What we've got to be doing is bringing the doubters, the naysayers into the same room and actually engaging in these kinds of conversations and getting them going. And this isn't ideal. We're not face to face, but in other ways, there are amazing opportunities for people to be giving their views. Wonderful to learn about, the Shell news from panelists. So I urge everybody to contribute because this is about convening and coming together. Mm. The third area that I want to speak about, which is my passion, is not about teaching, but about learning. And the question is, who do we serve? And on one hand, of course, the people who are going to affect the major radical change are going to be the senior leaders. They're going to be the captains of industry. What we can't afford to do, though, as a world is only look to that very narrow group in business. And this is where I want to speak about this notion of serving this broader church, making absolutely certain that, yes, on one hand, we need to build deep specialists in these aspects of change that we've been speaking about, in climate, in social justice, in continuity, and all of the themes that Jeffrey spoke about. But on the other hand, if we cannot bring sustainability into all of our programs, we've failed. The fact that we even have departments in universities that are talking to sustainability is an indication of the changes that we still have to make. Because if we're not weaving it in, it's like trying to have a course on business ethics in an MBA. If you're not taking ethics through every stage of the value chain, then how are we dealing with ethics? The second point that I'd like to make is the importance of post-experience learning, because it's one thing talking to graduates and undergraduates. In my experience, they're the ones who are the most acutely aware of the issues of sustainability. They're the ones who are coming in sick of being told that the previous generation made the problems and now they've got to solve it. The problems where we have to be catering for is actually the unlearning that has to take place with established businesses, with people who've learned the models that we, in many cases as business schools, exposed them to, which were models of shareholder capitalism, which were models of short-term gains, which were models of valuations of corporations without ever thinking about external costs. So it's our job to actually get out there and be working with organizations and with individuals to be coming together, not because we have all the answers, but because we know we have to co-create a new world. So I think business schools have a significant role to play, and we've got to be humble about that role. But I'm keen to effect change across all its dimensions. Thanks, stop there, Nicola. Rob. Thank you.
So we have 3 takes on the issue. Of course, Peter, I will involve you because there's so many points that I think are not open for discussion, but hopefully also for reinforcement and then maybe please give your take on what you just heard.
No, yeah, I would be way more bold than Nicola. I think the business schools are at the center of the change that the world needs. Yeah. So let me try and explain that. You know, it was 2012, and Jan Peter will remember this, that I made a speech in Rio in which I said, the accountants will save the world. And you know, that played to a certain part of the audience. It fell in deaf ears on most others. But what I meant to say is, it is not until you change what companies measure in their performance that you will change the outcomes of what they will deliver. So as long as all we do is ask them to report financial results, they will optimize those, and collectively we will go off the cliff. So we need to radically move to true value capitalism, which means we need to measure the externalities, we need to measure the environmental impact and the social benefits that business creates. And we need to integrate that into the performance measurement. Well, that's happening now at a pace that you can't believe. You know, the IFRS, the International Accounting Body, has announced the International Sustainability Standards Board to become alive around COP26 later this year. Those will be the accounting rules for non-financial data. TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, will change the fiduciary duty of boards when it comes to climate aspects. So the demand of business on what to produce in terms of data about their performance is going to change. That means that the managers, the leaders running these businesses need to be educated to actually improve the environmental impact or be more socially beneficial to the communities where they operate. That requires a completely different tool set. And it's one of my big frustrations, and that's why I was shaking my head. That was not out of disrespect, Nicola, but I was shaking my head because the business schools are as much part of the system that needs to change. You know, it's no longer good enough to have a sustainability module that people can or can't use. We really need to fundamentally, at the core, change the curriculum of MBAs. And that's why I said earlier, everything has to change. And still the accountants will save the world.
Maybe can I redirect your remark, Peter, not only to Nicola, because then it might become just an internal business school discussion, which I think is really important. But say this metrics challenge also boils down then to what companies can do with this. So can I redirect this remark to Helen also? Say, how do you deal with this? Because lots of the things you want to measure, you cannot measure. It's qualitative measures. And the things that you can measure very often, can also create all sorts of key performance illusions. There is a sort of perverse incentives also in this measurement problem. On the other hand, we cannot do without measurement. So how do you deal with this in this sort of volatile environment of measurement, reporting, where we are? And then, of course, how do you collaborate with business schools, if any?
Yeah. I think it comes down to what we're talking about. It is a mindset, because actually reporting more, you can argue and you can debate and you can discuss the necessity of it. But I think a lot of change management is what you measure. And I think Jan Peter actually brought it up in one of his top 3. I do think standardization around science-based targets will absolutely help. A little bit like we've got the SDGs as a language. I think science-based targets and an understanding of that language is really important. But as a company, we have taken the decision that, like your P&L and your balance sheet, we have our sustainability metrics, and they are as important. And as a member of the board, my incentives are driven by the sustainability metrics. And actually, that's what you're going to talk about, your Nexus principle. I call that the sustainability balance sheet in some respects. It's your debits and your credits. And I really like the way, I like that framework in terms of how you're providing a tool to talk about it. But it's an absolute necessity, is the measurement system. And yes, it will be, Peter talks about, be run by accountants, but in a very different the accountant of today will be very different to the accountant of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the role of business schools, not only in teaching the tools and the techniques, I also think it's about the behaviors and it's about the leadership, because I do think, again, come back to the discussion at the very beginning, those confrontational conversations, we need to be feeling okay about having those. We need to, I think, arm our next generation and the generation to come with more courage, more, or more tools around the behaviors that will drive the system change. I also think, at the end of the day, this panel and the people who are listening to us, we are that lucky 2%, as we call it. We are the people that get the food, the water, the access to education. So it's absolutely our responsibility to be driving these changes.
Let's take your last remark also, not the business school, but also the nexus. Jan-Peter also referred to this. There will be a breakout session later on this afternoon on the nexus, where we also launch an initiative where we then translate the global nexus idea. We have Mans Nielsen also presenting his ideas also that he supported in the SDG agenda, and linking it up to positive and negative interactions and interlinkages in order to measure whether we actually make progress or not. And now we try to develop it then at the company level. And in the first breakout, by the way, we will also look at that much more from the strategic point of view of companies. And in the second breakout, we will then see how you can make that work in the nexus of partnerships. Companies, civil society, governments, which is a completely different sort of metrics you have to develop in order to bring progress. But maybe take that point of, it's very difficult to assess whether you actually make progress, because you have positive effects, negative effects, and then to assess that. Maybe Jan-Peter, can you develop that idea a little bit further? What is the experience you have in the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition that has these front-runner companies, including DSM? Are they open to this nexus and a more critical approach to net positive effects, for instance, of business strategies?
Rob, you're right. You need a critical approach. In fact, everything starts with raising the right questions. When we started with the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, we said, can we have a common reflection on the future of business models? How can you integrate sustainability into business models? That's how we started it. And then the question is, how can you transform your organizations? How to implement this type of thinking? What's necessary? And then asking yourself the question, how can we contribute to the SDGs, to climate change, and to the circular economy? This is, in fact, the start of the discussion. And then it's about, what are we really doing? What about our achievements? What about the failures? The good thing of DSM, they are so transparent about their results. They also have a paragraph in their annual report, what went wrong. If you are able to write such a paragraph, that means you're in control and you know how to improve. I think this is really key. So I'm fully aligned with Peter that the issue of metrics is really important. It's about better measurement techniques. It's about honesty. It's about transparency. And I also would like to add, it's also a matter of having the right stakeholder dialogue. Because if you talk with others, with companies of the value chain, with researchers, with NGOs, it helps to have a better profile, and it makes your organization stronger. So I must say, concerned about the fact that a lot of companies are talking about SDGs. Yes, we are in line with the SDGs, but then the question is, are you doing enough? Is it a real story? Yes. This is the key element. So, and you can have different techniques to improve it. And that's what we try to do as Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. Let me give an example. The last report was about plastics. Many people are concerned about plastics. And then the question is, what can we do by ourselves? And if you are taking the right approach, that's also a reason to say, then we talk with governments about regulation and so on. So you need everyone.
But I hope you understand that, say, the academic criticism to some of these metrics discussions is that you can also have the wrong metrics. This is the box ticking criticism that many companies face. This is the, for instance, as regards to the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, the UN Global Compact came up with a report last year where you say, well, companies embrace it, but it's cherry picking. It's the easy goals. It is then reporting about that might be nice, but it can also be misleading that you say you do well, but actually we call that in scientific terms, we call that moral self-licensing. You think you're doing well, but actually 90% of what you do is not well. So the reporting, the metrics might also give the false illusion of progress. So Peter, you raise your hand, so maybe you can.
Yeah, no, I'm following up on what you said, because you're so right. You know, there's now plenty of companies in the world who are making net zero carbon promises for 2050 or earlier. And that's good stuff. There's loads of companies putting out sustainability reports. The problem with these reports is that at the moment, these data points are not comparable because they're not based in accounting rules, they're more guidelines. But the bit in the middle is actually missing in many companies. And that is, what are the operating plans that companies are putting in place now to actually halve emissions by 2030 to get to net zero by 2050. And so, you know, that's always the qualification I have to put on my own words. Just reporting better data, even if you measure them the right way, is not going to be enough. You need to really have ambitious targets which are science-based. You need to have an operating plan which is able to deliver against those targets. And then you need the ESG, the disclosures to show the world the progress you're making.
So Nicola, maybe you can respond to this. Is there any role for executive education in this sort of swamp of metrics, but also because we face quantitative metrics, everybody likes quantitative metrics, the accountants in the first place, I suppose, and qualitative metrics that might even cover most important developments, where I also see accountants now like PricewaterhouseCoopers say, we cannot just check this. So we have a difficulty also in subscribing to the good intentions of a company. But what would be executive education role in this?
Well, I think, Rob, it's obviously about metrics, but the thing is, when Peter spoke about the translation into the operating plans and into the granularity of day-to-day operations, that's where the rubber actually hits the road. It's all very well having a board set a great target and decide on, there's no single hairy number here. I mean, let's get over that. You know, the fallacy of that there's a single measure that's going to roll this all into one happy thing is out the window. But to me, we have to go back a second here, and this question about a curiosity and a willingness to have the unpleasant conversations, a willingness to actually put on the table what we're doing, where we're sourcing from, the fact that we're not brave enough to actually talk to our providers of capital around delaying returns, for example. I think it's dangerous. Metrics matter, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, what is going to change the needle here is what companies do. And we've got to align our metrics with practices. So, you know, the question for me is not start with the metrics always. Start with the targets, yes, and work back. But how do we embed this into companies? Now, when you ask me, is there a role for executive education? Well, absolutely. If we've grown up where our performance targets have been set without due regard to the things, the practices that we're saying are actually harming us going forward and are destroying the world for my grandchildren, you know, then we're actually getting it wrong. So my argument would be, from the perspective of business schools, absolutely, but we cannot afford to only focus on new graduates. We have got to be working with organizations right now to start unlearning and relearning and providing a safe place where we can have courageous conversations.
Thank you, Nicola. I see Helen also. I see you, I recognize you. Maybe one line to this, because I want to link it also now to the SDG agenda. Of course, everybody knows SDGs are 17, there are 169 targets, but there are also 230 indicators that are heavily criticized also for not being specific enough or too one-sided and not really measurable or whatever. So one of the challenges of the SDG agenda is that we say we have 2030 goals, and then we do backcasting instead of front forecasting in trends. And that then has a repercussion on our metrics of today. So I know that you wanted to respond also to the other topics, Ellen, but maybe you can also refer to this, because one of the challenges that we see also, that I see also when I work together with companies, that it is quite difficult to translate the 2030 agenda into present metrics in order to make it meaningful also in terms of strategy?
Yeah, again, I'm going to say it is, I think it is a matter of perspective, because for me, and I'm going to respond first of all to the conversation that was going on. It's not just about the metrics, because I think if you say, hey, these are the SDGs, this is the role the companies are playing, here's how you operationalize it. I think you can look at what a company is doing every year and say, hey, they walking the talk. So what new products are actually coming out of the system? What innovations are in the innovation pipeline? What are the business strategies that you see coming out of businesses? I do wonder if sometimes we make these things so difficult to assess, whereas really if you get into a company, and I think it was Jan-Peter, you said it, you ask the right questions, I think you can tell whether there is cherry picking, whether there is greenwashing in companies. Because I think if you are a company and, you know, this cherry picking notion or backcasting, for me, the important thing for corporations, and you know, of course, the 17 is big, and the best way I think corporations can actually tackle this collectively is actually to say, what are your unique capabilities? And I think, Peter, this is where you go down the pathway way, you know, so what are your unique capabilities as a corporation? So let me take DSM, who is a science and technology company in health, nutrition, and sustainable living. And with our unique capabilities, what SDGs, what are the bigger problems in the world that we actually know that if we do it right, we can really make system change? And then let's work on that, and let's get all of the businesses and all of the products and all of them the KPIs aligned to that. Now, by default, you touch on other SDGs. You touch on diversity, you touch on partnership, because you can't do it alone. But for me, that's a little bit, you know, you can start at today, and I talk about it in a very simple term. And it's not simple, but we share it in this simple way, because if we can make these frameworks easy for companies to understand, then I think you can collectively drive the system change. So you can start today or you can backcast to tomorrow. The important thing that is we're checking on the roadmaps. Not roadmaps that you check on every 3 or 5 years. Those are roadmaps that I think you can check in every quarter, every year on how companies are progressing.
Maybe confront you with some of the research also done by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, for instance. A couple of years ago, it was found, and it's sort of reiterated by the recent research on cherry picking that you just mentioned, is that many companies face a problem. They face the problem that they want to embrace the SDGs, but they find it difficult to translate it into core activities. Partly that's because they operationalize it in terms of CSR, and it was also mentioned, or they wait until government regulates, or they strike partnership deals, but that will take a long time really to make them transformational. So my question to you would be, maybe Peter can answer that first, because I referred to a research 2 years ago. Maybe things have changed. Maybe you can tell us something about that. We have a more positive view on this. Or then the next question would be, if not, or if we need to develop further, what do we have to develop further also as business schools to really make it possible for companies to translate a relatively complex agenda, an aspirational agenda, into concrete action today and in partnership approaches and the like. So Peter, is it still Bloom, the stage of the implementation of the SDGs, or can we be more positive? Let's start with that.
No, I think globally we need to really accelerate because in many of the SDGs, we've actually been pushed back quite a lot as a result of the pandemic. So there's still a lot of work to be done. I have a bit of a sobering view of the role of business against the SDGs, because like you say, 70 goals, 169 targets, 231 KPIs. What the hell do you want me to focus on, right?
Yeah.
So what we've done in Vision 2050, and again, time to transform.biz, and you can download all that material for free. We have said there are 3 global challenges, the big ones: climate emergency, loss of nature, and mounting inequality. If you use that as the frameworks to transform the products and the services that you as a business provide to your markets, then you will see that if all these transformations happen, all of the SDGs will be covered. And that's actually explicitly made clear in the report. So I think the role of business is in its reporting, particularly in its sustainability reporting, to show the progress towards SDGs. But in the implementation of its strategies and the design of its strategies, the SDGs are not the most useful framework. It's really focused on the 3 big issues, transform along those lines, and the SDGs will be the outcome.
Don't you think that if you use a different frame, that you might also undermine the SDG agenda?
Yeah, there's always the risk that you make different trade-offs.
Yeah.
But at least you're focusing on the 3 biggest challenges in the world.
Why I make the remark also, Peter, is because since the start of the SDGs, of course, I've been in an academic debate with all my colleagues, basically saying it's not enough, or it's too much, it's too complex, and they are the wrong targets. And at a certain moment, I've stated in the last 5 years, and I think Jan-Peter will also agree with that, say it's the best agenda we have. In a way, we developed indicators. There's collaboration between international organizations like the OECD, ILO. We have databases developed, and there's a sort of pooled agenda that we can also. And it's difficult to, at least do. It's important to criticize it, but it's even worse than to say, okay, we stand aside and don't do anything. So there's a trade-off there.
I'm not trying to criticize, I'm just saying, how do you, because business is about pragmatic action.
Yeah.
And if you focus the action, but measure against the SDGs as outcome, then you'll see a lot of mobilization happen.
Okay. No, thanks for that. Maybe we enter into the last couple of minutes of this panel. Maybe have a last round also with reflections on what we heard, but maybe I can push you a little bit to say, okay, last round, what should we focus on as the business school, as the Rotterdam School of Management? It's clear that we want to be a force for positive change. What would be your 1 or 2 major topics that you really want us to pursue? Can I give Jan-Peter the first?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think a key element is you must always ask the question, what has really changed? Jeffrey spoke about businesses in the United States, and we all know the Business Roundtable. They published a statement on the purpose of a corporation. The question is, 1 year later, what has really changed? Nicola talked about business schools. If a business school or university is saying, yes, we are standing behind SDGs, but if the research programs do not change, if the education programs do not change, if you're not using other books, for example, then what's the meaning of it? So the key element is you must be able to clarify what has really changed. That counts for the story you're delivering as a company, that has to do with your strategy, your KPIs, and the willingness to report about it. At this moment, I must say that the awareness really has increased. It's completely different 10 years ago. The tools have improved. And now it's a matter, and Peter, I agree with what you've said, there are at this moment much better mechanisms. You should use them. And if you use those new mechanisms, then you can really be a force of change. Then what keeps me busy is it is more than only a matter of technique or using metrics. It's a matter of conviction. It's a matter of passion. It's a matter of willing to change this world in a better way. So it's a combination of having a view on society and economies, doing good for society, and being very practical. You hear more and more about the well-being economy. This is a matter of which type of society do we want to have. And I think a lot of people are convinced that we have to change things. So I think the momentum is there to change, but also the willingness to make difficult choices. That's exactly what you can see. And that's what we try to discuss within the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. That's about how we talk with each other about these issues. And it's my conviction that if we really want to change, it's a matter of and government responsibility and the businesses and the NGOs and the universities and all these centers. We need them all. And if you could be on the same line, then you really can make the difference. And it gives me hope, I must say. So it's a matter of speeding up developments, and we're on the direction is okay, but we have to do much more.
Thank you, Peter. Jan-Peter. Helen, can I give you the floor to say the 2 tips that we need to do also as business schools to speed up the pace?
Yeah, I've got 3, and I actually one of them's triggered by the conversation that we're having right now, which is I actually think there are ways that the business schools can continue to give the tools on how to operationalize these things. Peter's talked about, I've talked about how we do in DSM. I think there are ways to simplify, there are ways to have impact, and we can do that tomorrow with the folks that are coming out of business schools. So how do you operationalize it in very simple tools and manners? The second thing I already talked about is, let's not just talk about the theory, but let's talk about the behaviors, and let's talk about how you create ambassadors that come out of the business schools. How do you, through the education system, give more people the courage, the confidence to drive the change that's required? And then, the last piece of it for me is, I would love that all of the students that come out of business school let their feet do the talking. What companies are you going to join? Join the companies that are going to make a difference to the world, that really are going to make these changes, because that will have massive impact when we have the talent that's doing the talking.
I think there are some really optimistic signals also from the younger generations that 60%, according to what's the Deloitte research, wants to go for companies with purpose and not necessarily profit. So in that sense, the time is there. So let's see whether we can make the alignment, Ellen. Thanks for that. Peter, what are your 2 takes for the business schools?
I guess it depends a bit on your level of ambition, but the first one would be really embrace this new way of thinking that reinvents capitalism. You stop using the stakeholder value model or the shareholder value model as the core thinking in the curriculum, and really embrace shareholder capitalism or stakeholder capitalism. Sorry. The second layer of ambition is a different one. I am currently working with one of the leading MBAs in Europe who have said we will use Vision 2050 and really redesign our curriculum according to that. And I'm obviously talking about Vision 2050 because that's the one that we've helped produce, but of course. Any other framework is fine too. But really fundamentally rethink the curriculum to embrace this world of true value capitalism, of regenerative business models, and of more resilience in systems. And very specifically, I need your help. And let me phrase that clearly. There's a lot of talk about ESG and disclosures. We had some of it today. There's not enough talk about how will that actually change capital allocation models, because all capital allocation models are based on DCF, on discounted cash flow analysis. And we know one thing for sure, it will take years and years, if ever, before environmental or social aspects will be turned in cash items. So how will we integrate non-cash items into capital allocation or in cost of capital calculations?
Thanks, Peter. A clear assignment also to business school. So maybe, Nicola, the last minute for you. How are we going to take this up as a challenge?
Thank you, Rob. So I'm not going to say what business schools do. I think it's more important here that we listen. I think what is critical is to invite all of our stakeholders to hold us to account. And you don't make this change overnight. If I look at RSM, if I look at other schools, I think there have been some schools that have really starting to rise to the challenge. If I look, for example, at the RSM across our MBAs, every single course has to be linked to an overarching goal around positive change, around sustainabilities, around the sustainable development goals. And so, what I would argue is hold us to account. And I think we also need to start judging schools. It's not, I've seen a lot of judgment around all business schools. I think what we're seeing is business schools that are further ahead, and there are business schools that are falling behind. If we're further ahead as a business school, it's our job to also collaborate with other partners and support them. But it's also, we need to stand and be held accountable and be able to share the progress that we're making. And I think an event like this, Rob, is one example of making sure that we're out there hearing hard truths and making sure that we get better and continue to improve. So thank you to everybody for the feedback.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Jan-Peter. I really appreciate your candor, your input. Of course, as I said already in my opening statement, we are only starting up something. Of course, we are already working on this, so it's a moment in time to reflect on this. I'm really happy about your critical reflections and your positive feedback. So let's see how we can take this further. Now, I am as the leader also in a sort of a challenge, because I think all the panelists are now excused, that you can leave, but I will stay. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And our technical assistants will help me now to show you that we are now entering into a little break. Carlijn is there also. I could show you the program of the rest of the day. We have 3 breakouts. And so we have a little break until, and at 4:45 exactly, we'll start with 3 breakouts. And you already have heard about these topics, because the wickedness challenge is about principles of sustainable business and how to deal with systemic change. And we have a great panel there with lots of input from different angles of society. Then we have the partnership challenge, which basically says how to collaborate and really make it transformational. And the Nexus challenge was there as well. You can see it also in the program booklet, and there are lots of interesting lineups. Then after the session, I already announced the next, because then the next slide, please. After the breakouts, a number of these launches that we do today will then be open for you, for conversation and the like. Every day we will launch a number of other initiatives, but there will be a book and a website. And also Jan-Peter mentioned this and I was happy about this. The book will be released at the end of the year, but the website will be launched today. There is a new alumni association. All our former students are really happy also to be invited to the booth to discuss further how we are going to make that work. There is an Insight series also that is launched by the Partnership Resource Center. We have a booth of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, was mentioned as well, and the executive program, education program also is there. You can find also scientific papers, a special issue of the Journal of International Business Policy. Normally, it is protected, but now, especially for the conference, also it is an open source and open access initiative. You can download it, just go to the booth, and you will find the information. And the same is true for the Nexus initiative.